Now back to Inside Real Estate. Here's Mike the Realtor.
Hey folks, we are back. Inside Real Estate, sports, entertainment, politics, the whole shebang right here. InsideRealEstateRadio.com is the website. InsideRealEstateRadio.com is the website. Hey, time for our sports segment, and we've got on the line a extremely well-accomplished author, Jeff Benedict. He is the co-author of QB, My Life Behind the Spiral, the Steve Young book. Jeff, are you on the line with us?
Good morning. Good to be here.
Good morning. Thanks for coming on the show. Super excited to talk to you, author of over a dozen books, many in the sports world, a contributor to Sports Illustrated. Excited to talk to you. I'd love to talk some about the current book and then, of course, some of the work you've done on athletes and crime and your other books, and as well as athletes and crimes against women and how that's kind of rampant in collegiate and professional sports. But let's start off with the current book, working with Steve Young. Great book, and his story is such a great story, and there's so many things, if you're a sports fan out there, that you forget about. And, you forget about that, Steve Young, went to the USFL to start with, and he had that huge contract, et cetera. And so, get into the genesis of the book and working with Steve Young and some of those things.
Well, the genesis for me was about 5 years ago. I was writing a cover story for Sports Illustrated about a kid from Chicago named Jabari Parker, who was going to be the first African-American Mormon drafted into the NBA. And my editor at Sports Illustrated wanted me to go back and find a couple of prominent Mormon athletes that had faced the same decision Jabari faced, whether to go on a Mormon mission or not at age 19. And I specifically was asked to go interview Steve Young, who didn't serve a mission. And so I interviewed Steve for the magazine, and at the end of the interview, he surprised me big time by asking me if I'd be interested in helping him write his life history. And the impetus for him to do this was that Steve played his whole career as a bachelor, which is really unusual in the NFL. And then right when he retired, he got married, and then he and his wife have gone on to have 4 kids, but none of his children ever saw him play. And so it's like there's this other life that their dad had that they didn't know anything about. And he wanted to get it all documented and written down. And so that's what he hired me to do. His original thinking wasn't to make it, to publish a book out of it. It was going to be something really intimate and private just for his kids. But as I started writing it, the stories that I was discovering, and I followed Steve, so it's not like I wasn't familiar with his career, but
right.
There were so many things about his personal life that nobody knew. I was learning things about him that even his parents didn't know. And I just thought, I kept saying to him, this story is so good and so, I think, so inspirational that you should really let everyone read it. And he resisted that for a number of years, actually. And it wasn't until last year that he finally warmed up to the idea of maybe letting the rest of the world read what we had written for his kids.
Yeah, and he's a very private guy. I'm a huge fan, and so many things in here that we just as fans we don't know because he was so private. He had such a this really is a great story because he went through a tough time. So many coaches said that he couldn't play. He didn't have a good spiral. He was a running.
He's a lefty.
He's a lefty, exactly. And he started at the bottom of the line. He's 8th in line at one point. But even so he gets USFL. Okay, that tanks. Then he goes to the Bucks. Has 2 horrible seasons at the Bucks, and people forget about that. I mean, when I'm thinking Steve Young, I was a huge fan of his. All I remember is the great 49er days, but you forget about early on, the Joe Montana, but even you forget about Bono. So get into some of that.
Well, the thing that was most interesting to me is when you look at his trajectory from when he started playing football, which was in Greenwich, Connecticut, a town that's never produced an NFL player. Here comes this kid out of Greenwich who was an option quarterback. He never threw. Greenwich ran the ball all the time, and it was really because he was such a good runner, they never had to pass. Mm-hmm. When he got to BYU, they were a quarterback factory, and they had Jim McMahon, who at the time was the number 1 quarterback in the country, and Steve was 8th on the depth chart. I mean, most schools don't even have 8 quarterbacks, but BYU did.
Right.
And his coach came out and told him, you'll never play quarterback here. and they were going to move him to defense. In fact, they had moved him to defense. And the other thing that's lurking in the background, and this is one of the revelations in the book, is Steve had a severe case of separation anxiety as a child and as a teenager and as a college student. It was undiagnosed. So at the time, no one knew what it was. He didn't know what it was. But he just going to college was a death-defying thing for him. He never unpacked his duffel bags his freshman year. He lived out of a duffel bag because every week he thought he wanted to quit and go home. And this was something that actually stayed with him through college, through the USFL, through Tampa Bay. It wasn't until he was in San Francisco, and you mentioned Bono, it wasn't until the Joe Montana, Steve Bono years that Steve finally went and saw a doctor and figured out what was really wrong, what was going on. And so when you talk about revelations in a book, for a lot of athletes and celebrities, those kinds of revelations are embarrassing because they involve behavioral things that are, inappropriate or whatever. Steve didn't have anything like that. He had something called anxiety that actually a lot of people have, but everyone's afraid to admit they have it because they think no one else has it. And Steve had it. He had it severely. And I think one of the most kind of powerful things in the book is when he finally rises to the top in San Francisco, what no one knows is what he really had to overcome. It wasn't just Joe Montana or Tampa Bay or the USFL. It was this fear factor that he worked through, which I think is one of the most powerful parts of his story.
Yeah, and people don't understand how real that really is. And I think, in this book, you guys put it in perspective that this is so real. People have to deal with this, and that what he had to deal with over his lifetime. But also doing that in such a stressful environment as professional sports at all, much less the NFL, and then with a high-profile team with the 49ers and then coming in with Montana. Just this whole story was just really amazing. It's an amazing read, and everybody really needs to grab this book and read it seriously. Just an amazing read. Let's kind of move forward a little bit let's talk about a topic that is really important. I've hammered this home on the show before. So many campuses, college campuses, have a real issue with athletes and violence against women, and even at the professional level. Why is this such a problem nationally, particularly at the collegiate level, but even at the professional level? And why are we allowing it? Why are scouts picking up kids both at the collegiate and the professional level that have histories of violence against women, but histories of violence at all?
Well, first of all, I think that when you say it's a problem with athletes on campuses across the country, the real issue is that violence against women, period, is a problem on campuses throughout the country, not just involving athletes, but just involving men in general. There are too many young men on college campuses, particularly when alcohol is involved, that take criminal liberties with women. Of course, it's complicated when the women have consumed alcohol too, which makes it harder to prove these cases. But this is a widespread problem across the country. It's not exclusive or unique to athletes. The reason the athlete part gets more attention is because they are athletes, but secondly, because when athletes do it, they tend to get a little better treatment in the criminal justice system than some of the other guys who do this. One of the reasons for that is because athletes have these what I call safety nets around them, and there's this whole system that's in place to protect and keep these guys eligible to play. And when it's one thing when you have an athlete who's struggling academically or is having some issues that involve something to do with school, but when it involves criminal behavior against a woman on a campus, that to me is one of those times where coaches and the other infrastructure that's around them should not be used to insulate them from consequences. I think at the pro level, it just gets to another. It's almost ratcheted up even more. I mean, most pro athletes, the overwhelming majority of pro athletes are not involved in the kind of behavior you're talking about. It's the few that are, and they garner a tremendous amount of attention, but partly because what happens is we just saw this with the New York Giants. I mean, their kicker has admitted to some pretty brutal treatment of his wife, and his employer knew about it. The New York Giants were aware of it, And the New York Giants mounted a very public anti-violence against women campaign over the last 2 years. They had some of their premier players like Eli Manning speaking out in public service announcements about why this is bad and why we need to stand up against it as players and as men. And yet the Giants had another player on the team who was doing it, and the team didn't do anything about it. And I think that's why you keep seeing these unfortunate and embarrassing headlines in the media about pro athletes and violence against women.
Yeah, I absolutely wholeheartedly agree. Folks, by the way, Jeff Benedict, author of several books on this topic, by the way, some of which are Public Heroes, Private Felons, Athletes and Crimes Against Women, Pros and Cons, The Criminals Who Play in the NFL, Athletes and Acquaintance, Rape, also Out of Bounds, Inside the NBA's Culture of Rape, Violence, and Crime. Some great books, great reads on these topics here. But folks, right now, hey, you need to hop out there. You need to grab QB, My Life Behind the Spiral, Steve Young, of course, co-authored with Jeff Benedict. A great read. And this is totally opposite of some of those stories because Steve Young he's the ultimate guy on the field and the ultimate guy off the field. Just one of the nicest guys ever. Private guy, as you said, had a hard time even putting out, a very PG story, but an amazing story. And he kind of always shied away from the limelight to a degree, and just an amazing read. Go out and grab it. Jeff's website, folks, at jeffbenedict.com. jeffbenedict.com, an amazing author. Jeff, thank you so much for being on the show, and I hope we can talk to you again in the future.
Hey, thank you very much. Have a great day.
You too. Folks, Inside Real Estate, Sports, Entertainment, Politics. See you next week, 8 to 9 a.m. Every Sunday, we're out of here. Or contributors of the show Inside Real Estate with Mike Kruizinga are attorneys, CPAs, tax advisors, or investment advisors, and are not providing legal advice during the course of the show. If you need professionals of the show, 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 if you need